Karen Willenbrink-Johnsen and her husband Jasen Johnsen invited their friends Martin Janecky and Chris Stenzel over to blow some glass. They're working on a series of birds. Karen begins the process by sifting white powdered glass over a ceramic kiln shell. Using various tools, Karen will then push the powdered glass out of the way, creating a pattern. The resulting pattern is then placed in a fusing kiln, brought up to temperature, and fused into a matrix of powdered colored glass. This will eventually be rolled up on the outside of the bubble that the team are working on tomorrow. Today's hot-de-verre are in black, and they're already loaded into the annealing oven. As that hot-de-verre warms up, Martin is putting the finishing touches on a pair of tweezers that Jasen has made for him. The Martin's tweezers are an exclusive design of Jasen Johnsen tools.
We'll make the bird. We'll start the bird. We don't finish the bird all the way, but we'll make the basic shape.
Martin describes the steps that he'll take to achieve the finished sculpture.
So it stays in the center. So it's like this. Just like a little wiener, whatever.
The most challenging aspect of this piece is creating that bird form in the middle without adding any significant bits.
Then we'll finish the bird. Like that.
Martin begins by gathering a large bubble of clear glass. This glass is then coated with 3 layers of powdered white glass.
He's vacuuming his cake in his hand and a flower in his mouth.
Wow. After rolling through the white, Martin rolls through some crushed colored frit. Once the frit is loaded on and melted in, it's time to lengthen the bubble out considerably, creating a perfect foundation to apply the pattern to the outside. Chris goes in with the forks to grab the first sheet of kiln shell. The fusing came out of the kiln at about 1050 degrees Fahrenheit. And now Chris is heating it up so that it can bend at about 2300 degrees Fahrenheit.
That looks good.
Coming out.
They only have one chance to stick the glass on so that it's soft enough to wrap onto the outside of the bubble. The team will then repeat this process, each time taking less and less glass until the entire surface of the bubble is complete.
Stay down on it, yeah. Stop.
Right there?
Get that on there, Martin. Yeah, more, little pinch more. Okay. Can I leave that open?
Without turning, that loose glass starts to drip off the side. It's liquid hot now, but it's so thin that by the time Jasen comes out, it has cooled down enough to crack when Karen bats it with the tag.
Okay, get all that in. Okay. Can you back out a little?
Once the pattern is completely covering the bubble, Karen will sift powdered white glass over the surface and then wipe the white glass away, leaving a halo effect around the black design. Now we've got all the material and all the color and pattern. It's time to start to shape up the piece. Martin begins by getting the bubble really hot and squeezing it with the paper to divide it into 3 separate sections.
Holy shit.
Once Martin has all 3 sections roughed in, he can start to focus more on the body of the bird. He'll begin to differentiate the front, the head and neck, and the tail of the bird in the central bulb. By holding the bubble up and letting it sink back onto itself, Martin changes the axis for the center section of the piece. Unfortunately, at this stage, Jasen noticed a crack in the pipe. This was an emergency situation that had to be dealt with immediately. Jasen moved one of his welding rigs outside, Chris put on the Kevlar gloves, and Martin ran the piece outdoors, where they set it up on a yoke and hurriedly tried to tack the 2 sides of the blowpipe together before the piece fell onto the ground.
Let's splash. Again, do it again. Got it. You guys do this all the time, I know.
After repeating that process 3 times, Martin decided it was time for a cigarette. Jasen wanted to get a good look at how the weld had turned out. With that emergency out of the way, they can get back to shaping the bird. Martin pushes with the corks and then pulls with the tweezer. From this point, Martin can begin to elongate the mass of glass, eventually stretching it out into the neck and head of the bird. Moving the glass around this way will definitely pull the bubble off center, so Martin wants to come back with the parchofis and push the 3 sections back onto the same axis. With everything back on center, Martin can start to draw out the tail of the bird.
Seriously beautiful.
Just gonna start this up.
As always, Martin will take a moment to straighten everything back up. Rather than just pulling a point, Martin wants to move the mass of glass along. He still has a lot more to stretch out for the head and neck, so he'll coax the glass along, little by little, each heat.
Looks like a penis.
Okay.
With the head and tail of the bird blocked into place, Martin can think about finishing the bottom, flattening it, and then breaking the piece off the blowpipe to finish the top. Martin wants to add a large mass of clear, a cheater bit. This will provide a large, stable platform for the punty to attach to. Using a wet paddle, Martin will push that mass of clear glass into the base. As that cools down, Martin starts to gather up the punty. This will be a large sculpture punty with a cold central core about the size of a pop can. After letting the mass cool down for a few minutes, Martin gathers again, but only halfway up the piece. To let gravity roll the glass back down before pushing it the rest of the way with a marver. This technique provides a punty with a very stable core and a sticky end for a strong attachment to the bottom of the piece. Once Martin says it's time to go, a little water and a tap break the piece free. Now it's time to finish off the section that represents the wings of the bird. Martin begins by stretching the break-off area, and then he'll trim that extra section off. First by squeezing it with the jacks, and then breaking it off the rest of the bubble. He needs that small opening so he can continue to inflate the bubble with the soffietto. The wings themselves get flattened down with the cork pads. They'll let gravity bring everything back to center simply by hanging the piece and letting it fall. Heron's design calls for the suggestion of the upturned tips of the wings. Martin achieves this look by pushing out bumps with the interior sculpting tool and then pulling the bumps into points with his tweezers.
What?
Martin will repeat this process 4 times on each side. The final step on top is to create a very narrow opening that mimics the spray of feathers around the perimeter. Again, that small opening allows him to re-inflate the bubble from the inside. Now it's time to finish the body of the bird. Martin starts to stretch the neck out. This neck needs to move quite a ways. Martin wants to coax the neck along into a very specific curve.
Okay.
He'll take his time heating and pulling, and then gently pushing the glass around with a cork pad. The next step is to add a small tuft of feathers onto the top of the bird's head. Chris repeats the process for the beak, gathering up clear glass, rolling in 218 powder, and then bringing it to Martin, who attaches it to the face of the bird and then trims it down to a point.
Oh my God. Okay.
In Karen's drawing, the bird is looking to the side, so Martin has grabbed the beak with his tweezers and starts to turn the bird's head. From here, the bird is pretty much complete. Martin wants to take a video for his Instagram followers. To remove the piece, Martin uses water and a tap, and it's broken free.
Woo!
This is the end of 7 hours continuous labor, and the first of a new series of work for Karen Willenbrink-Johnsen.
My God! Could there ever be a more beautiful piece of glass?
Karen Willenbrink-Johnsen and her husband Jasen Johnsen, working with Martin Janecky and Chris Stenzel. I'm Greg Owen, G-Man on Fire. Thanks for watching.